From Wolfsburg, after recovering from my arthritic attack, we were marched for days, possibly even weeks. I remember that several nights we spent in fields, just surrounded with the guards and resting. The odd time they found a barn, huge barns, whether they were railroad barns or whatever. We were chased into them and found refuge for the night there. But throughout the trip, whether it was day or night, I recall shots being fired to anyone who wasn't able to keep up with the main body by marching. Some of the time my father had to practically carry me. After this lengthy march, one morning we were told to get out of that huge barn and step onto some railroad tracks and get into some cattle cars and some coal cars which are open. We were fortunate, or at least I think I was fortunate, to be in one of the coal cars where there was more air because they stuffed hundreds of people into those cars. And on each corner of those coal cars there was one of the guards sitting with what I think was a Tommy gun or some automatic weapon. We traveled by that train for several days. Once I recall that some water was practically pouring over us from one of those watering facilities for the coal-burning locomotive. I don't recall having eaten anything other than what my father may have had in his pockets, such as stale bread or some other dried up potato peels and stuff. We finally arrived one evening, but we're not allowed to leave the train till early morning on a siding which I now know was Bergen-Belsen. We marched in the early hours of the morning through some forest, through a road that was almost silent like a graveyard. There was no life, no farms, no people. I later found out that was the site of what used to be a training camp for soldiers. We walked along from the siding in Bergen, which is a town between Celle and Hanover in Germany, and walked along that route, along the camp that was the training camp, right into what was later on called by the Germans Vernichtungslager, which means a liquidation camp. And my father pointed out to a sign overhead made in wrought iron as we crossed through the gates of Bergen-Belsen. It said in German, Arbeit macht frei. We passed some barracks that looked clean enough. I found out later these were the guards' barracks and officer quarters. And shortly after that we passed something that looked like a huge kitchen with chimneys. Only to find out later these were the chimneys of the crematoriums. I have had the privilege of taking my own pictures of of what I thought was a kitchen and facilities, including the implements on which the bodies were taken and put into the ovens. I was in Bergen-Belsen probably 3 to 4 months, one of the oldest to survive. It was bitterly cold, and I know now that if it wasn't for my father, I wouldn't have been here. The extermination camp of Bergen-Belsen was probably the worst point in my life on the Nazi oppression. It only lasted a few months, but it included episodes that maybe shouldn't have been brought out, but I feel as this may be the last time anyone can tell it, I must do so. We were all herded into what seemed to be barracks, well built from the exterior, but on the interior they consisted of a concrete floor, a half a dozen bunks in a corner, which in the 2 blocks that I have been were usually reserved for the leader of the block, for the capo and his helpers, Stubenälteste, which means the elder of the block, and the capo means the leader of the block. He usually would be a fellow who would be able to handle the people by a whip with the assistance of his Stubenälteste. He was responsible for chasing the people in and out of the barracks whenever the Germans would order an appell, which meant the counting of the heads. I have come shortly after that to a conclusion that that was one way of not having to shoot or kill us, but wear us out, since there's been no food in days served to anyone. The odd time when the kitchen has had some food for some of the barracks, and I assume they alternated them. Every 2-3 days another barrack got a container or 2 containers of soup, which certainly wasn't adequate for all to have, but only the stronger ones that could either steal by running past the container being carried from the kitchen to the barrack and dip their dish, in some instances some old rusted cans, and get some of this lukewarm soup. I wonder whether this would be considered soup. It was some boiled kohlraben. I assume those are some sort of beets. Whether they were boiled or just heated, by the time they got to the barracks, they weren't even warm. The ones who were able to run besides the container when they were carried by 4 people and dip their can in there and take a chance of being spotted by one of the Stubenälteste or capo or both, and were sure to finish off on the road and no longer being among us, because they would be beaten till they would lie in the mud and finish off their miserable lives that way. So since there was no food, everyone was at such state of health that when they were urged by the typhoid or by dysentery or by any other sickness that was spreading rapidly among us, when they would wind up going to the latrine, there was a huge open hall used as lavatory, and from all four sides being surrounded with what we would consider now 4x4s, fastened with posts to a subfloor. Some of these people didn't have the strength or couldn't keep their balance, and seeing some of these people from the sitting position, instead of getting up, falling backwards in their own increments and dying in that way. I'm here today because my father was tall by stature and reasonably strong-built man, was able to carry me most of the mornings out to the appeal, which is the counting of the heads, because not being quite tall enough, and by being rushed and hit and chased by the capo and Stubenälteste to exit 600 people from one hall through two small doors would have an impossible task. But my father would carry me through this stampeding crowd of half-dead people, and there was every morning, especially in the morning, a dozen or so people that didn't make it out, who were either stampeded or just couldn't get up in the morning and died inside the barracks. 3 nights, which puts us about the 12th of April, 1945. 3 nights before the liberation. I recall my father, who by then was dying, and I wasn't aware of it, called me over to his corner, because we didn't lie in one corner. It was impossible. Once you got into the stampeding crowd coming back to lay down on the concrete floor, everyone was hunting for a space where they could lean against the wall or be semi-comfortable by leaning against somebody else or on top of each other. He called me over, and I climbed through people to get to him, and he pointed out through a crack of a door that was open. We could hear shots and see sporadic bursts of lightning on the skies. He says, "Ich sehe Hitler's Sof." I see the end of Hitler. Be strong. It won't be long. I want you to see the downfall of Hitler. I want you to remember. This was the last time I heard my father speak. The next morning, it seemed like the Germans realized that the end was nearing. They didn't chase us out. They made an effort of it, but no one was really hitting anyone, and no one was pushing anyone to go outside. And one of our friends who has survived and was at the time a fellow who remembered me and my father from Wolfsburg, Falkenberg, from the camp in Silesia, and he pointed at my father and said to me, "Your father is dead." I was able to crawl over to kiss my father, and I collapsed. When I came to, there was a British soldier in front of me, and a couple of people who knew me from previous camps, and they kept saying in Yiddish and in Polish, pointing with a finger, "He speaks English, he speaks English." And this is how I have been taken out of the barrack, put on a stretcher. I think I was given a few needles, put in an ambulance. I was all of 17 years old. I was put in an ambulance, one of those trucks that has 4 stretchers in them. This one was a little different equipped. I was sort of cared for by 2 different nurses, 1 doctor, a British doctor. I think they belonged to the 5th British Corps, and they weighed me and tried everything. And they spoke with me English, and they wanted to know a few details, but I was too weak. I weighed at the time 76 pounds, and those are pounds European weight. In fact, it took about a week or 10 days till I was able to sit up, and I wanted immediately to repay my liberators, because when I saw this British soldier, in my mind I really thought he was a German in disguise, trying to trap me in thinking that I'm free. I have in a small way repaid them by being the camp interpreter for the 5th Corps, as well as for the later on camp police for several years. And my main aim at the time was to try and hunt down and do whatever I could the killers of my people.